Welcome to the Embodied Life podcast with Jake Potter. The Embodied Life podcast is brought to you by the Australian Centre for Embodied Practice, bringing the wisdom of the world's embodied and somatic practices together, intersecting deep thinking and embodied learning to restore goodness to ourselves and the world. So, I'd love to start, Andrea, just knowing a little bit about your relationship to how you've been embodied growing up. You know, I know that you've had a very unique childhood. You grew up in a way that I guess a lot of people don't. I'm curious to know, if you could kind of just wind back a little, what your relationship was to being an embodied human and however you thought about that or can contextualize that.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. It's true. I was raised in perhaps a untraditional way. If you're not from the West Coast of California, I had hippie parents who were, graduated from Berkeley, and it was right, in the '60s, and it was really a time of freedom and experimentation, and nudity was a big thing, and my father was a psychotherapist, a body psychotherapist, and who focused specifically on sexuality. So there was a lot of freedom and creativity and playfulness and naturalness around the human body. And at the same time, there was a bit too much of it. It was a little overboard for a young soul. So I can remember feeling really overwhelmed too. And I think for me, I have always lived in a body that is highly, highly sensitive. Like, I see things, I smell everything, down to, hikers walk by and I will be able to smell what they ate for breakfast. It's unbelievable. And touch is really important to me. And I'm very easily symptomatic. If I have a feeling, I also have a physical symptom usually, particularly if it's not a good feeling. So learning to be in my body has been really tough. I've come to embodiment from the oversensitive edge as opposed to the numb, I need to wake up side. So yeah, for me, embodiment practices were a means of surviving myself, is the truth.
And I guess, like, having, as you say, a father in the 60s, doing body psychotherapy. I mean, there weren't even many people doing psychotherapy really then. And then having body psychotherapy seems like, I guess, also revolutionary in some sense. Like it would have been, a whole lot more alternative back in the day growing up in that sort of world, father being a body psychotherapist.
Absolutely. And he was one of the founders of that field. He was really one of the pioneers of the field. He originally started with Gestalt body therapy and then moved into integrated body psychotherapy. And then plus we were in and out of Esalen my entire childhood. So I was raised with Gazebo, Gazebo is an early childhood development center at Esalen Institute that really focuses on the naturalness and the organic development of a child. All outdoors, it's an all outdoor school. So I was raised also with those values. And I'm thankful. I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, you sort of describe being a little oversaturated in that certain way, but also seems like you've taken a very similar path. So there, I guess there must have been something in there that touched you or meant something to you, or you were like, yeah, this is something worth dedicating a life's work to, as you have done. And to think about, I guess, really, I suppose, wanting to hone down on this idea of therapy in motion, which you've really established as part of the open floor curriculum. Um, and just, our conversations as of recent, just sharing by email is something that you kind of really dedicating more and more time to is this cross between dance and the psychotherapeutic. Um, but I guess I'm also wondering if you could just give a little context, I suppose. Like I know that, the human potential movement in the 60s, especially at Esalen, was very like a lot of smashing pillows and it was big catharsis. Um, and I'm aware that the work has really changed since then, of what it means to be embodied and what it means to do therapy in that sort of way. So I'm wondering if you could just give a little context, I suppose, of, where you are now, but where that's sort of come from.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the those early 60s, 70s, 80s even, where what the focus was is expression. It wasn't necessarily embodiment, it was expression. Can I take what's inside of me and put it out with the idea that I'm going to then feel better? So it was a lot on catharsis, and it was a lot on movement and action, but not necessarily learning how to be an inhabitant of the body. Um, and so what we found in as a field, what we found as a field, not just me, is that that process of just getting out, and putting yourself in that situation actually deepens the groove of whatever it is you're trying to get out. And it was making it even harder for people to be embodied, and more necessary to do that catharting again and again, which isn't a functional or sustainable way of life. And so as a field, I think we really found that, oh, there needs to be, yes, expression is important, it's essential. There are things inside that need to be heard, seen, felt, and met, right, really met, in order for us to digest it and move on. But I think what's really what we've learned as a field is that process needs to slow down, and it needs to be in relationship with a present embodied other. That the relational component is key. And that's what's healing, not just express, 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 which is also fun. I mean, I had a lot of fun doing that. But, for some of the traumatic issues and the deeper issues, change didn't come. Change did not arrive. And for many people, even worse than that, damage is what arrived. Re-traumatization is what arrived. Um, so we've learned a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, trauma really, from my understanding, like living at a really somatic level of our organization and a really somatic level of the body. And I guess engaging in such wild modes of expression, like you said, there's a time and there's a place and it's helpful. Um, but it's too much a lot of the time. It's too much to just kind of go into all sorts of and I guess I'm curious to know, like, and this, I think, a really nice distinction between previously being this really expressive practice versus now maybe therapy and dance as you see it being more of an embodied practice, and so there's a relational component there. As you said, I'm wondering what other kind of components that you feel, because I kind of guess I think about it like we could be in a room together and I could really express to you and you could really express to me, and there still sort of could be these, I guess, characteristics of re-traumatization or of just flooding. And like, what else, if you could kind of like, what else is kind of feeding into this idea?
Yeah, I have actually a lot to say about this because, having been around a while, you see how things kind of go. And so I feel like we've kind of, in terms of the embodied field, and we start to understand trauma and really how trauma is embedded in the body and how it needs a certain kind of healing, a certain kind of slowness, a certain kind of titration with resources. It needs that relational component. It needs containment. It needs ground. It needs the resources, right, from an embodied being. And in Open Floor, we talk about many different kinds of resources, not just grounding, but there's many of them. When we're traumatized, we need to relearn those and reintegrate those slowly. However, trauma is not all of embodiment. Trauma, it happens, everybody has trauma, period. Some people really have unintegrated trauma, unresolved trauma, and just horrendous trauma. And and to kind of a balance in the field, not everybody does. And so I feel like embodiment has, when with the onset of all this work around trauma, which is brilliant and so necessary, we've kind of gone into this down regulating, this constant down regulating and that's important, but that's only a part of the picture. There's up regulating. There's a lot of need to also up regulate. Our world is in an up regulated space. And if we don't train our embodiment, our presence, our mindfulness to also up regulate, we miss a lot. We will constantly be overwhelmed. We'll be constantly trying to control our environment to have everybody settle down, and not be able to meet the speed of a universe that's that's really active, much less the excitement that comes with being an adult an adult, the risks we can take, the kind of erotic expressions that we can have, the kinds of creativity that we're capable need for us to be able to tolerate high levels of excitement without crashing into traumatic patterns. And so I think a lot of the embodiment that Open Floor is offering, and when I'm interested in the therapeutic process, is supporting upregulating even more than the downregulate if we need to. Absolutely. There's no point in going into more powerful expressions or more vital expressions if someone's not there to do it, right? If someone cannot stay present and they don't have the resources. But if they do, what we need, I don't know, on this planet, we need outspoken, loud, powerful people with strong opinions who who can be open and compassionate, relational. I feel we need this. We're missing this. So, in many ways, I would say that's what keeps me going through the work day.
Yeah, and I was just remembering in some time when I was studying with you, it would have been some years ago now. You were talking about the window of tolerance, and that, like, we have our range in the middle, and it's like, it's good to be within our window, and but there's that edge where you're not quite tipped over into dysregulation, but you're kind of hovering on this edge of your tolerance, and that is the point of learning. That is the point of growth. There's something about those edges which is like, I can just kind of sense as you say that, yeah, how can we live just fully, not tip over, but keep expanding that range?
Hmm. Hmm. In Gestalt, there's a phrase that I really like, which is called creating a safe emergency. And in the encounter work, we really work with that. We create an environment that on some parts of the nervous system, for most people, is going to feel a bit like an emergency because you're exposed, you're in front of people. There's a time limit, all these things that make all of us kind of go, right? But we also do a lot around all of the movement resources, all of the relational pieces that are necessary to actually create safety so someone can explore being right at that edge, that safe emergency, and start to find how they can up their capacity to tolerate intensity, exposure, vulnerability. How can they tolerate their own vulnerability is really what it comes down to, without thinking, protecting, disappearing, but just right there. Here I am. Yeah, I'm vulnerable. Here I am.
Yeah, and I guess also in that sense of tolerating our own vulnerability in the relational piece, there's also a huge healing piece in, I guess, like tolerating other people's vulnerability. I mean, I know I haven't, done that encounter work with you specifically, um, but to sort of give a little history, encounter work used to be called open floor, and then as open floor became open floor, the encounter work became encounter within open floor. That's right. Yeah, yeah, and I guess to kind of go into that a little bit more, that's like the relational piece comes in. Like, I'm wondering what, just to kind of give people a little context for, that don't know your work in encounter. It's like, can you describe that kind of what emerges in that place? Or I guess, you have a whole group of people and then you're all having this process of a really bottom up sort of processing. And then we're in relationship and that's important. And there's a whole thing that emerges, which is very different to a normal dance floor. And it's very different to psychotherapy.
And very different to traditional group process as well, and very different than historical encounter forms. So it's a synthesis of a lot of the newer understandings we have of how we relate to people in the intersubjective field. It's very clear, we know now, that we are responding to everything around us at all times. There's not such a thing as I'm having an experience and you're not a part of it. That's not a reality. That's not what's happening. So in the traditional group processes, at least I was taught, having been in lots of group process, that you sit back, somebody else is on the open seat. That's in Gestalt. That's what it would have been, is the open seat, and they're having their process. It's not your process, and you are not impacting them necessarily. To a degree, we can play that game and say that's true to a degree. But there's a whole nother piece of it is that if I'm sitting back here and I'm doodling and I'm falling asleep or I'm yawning and I'm like this and you're up there having your process, every part of you is registering that. Every part of you is registering that and might shift what you say, shift what you do to either protect yourself from what you perceive that nonverbal communication to mean, right? So in encounter work, what was really important to me is that when we're in a process, we are also very aware of how all the attention of others or the lack of attention of others is impacting us. And how we can regulate our body and resource ourselves with that. Because if I only show up when you're paying perfect attention to me, well, good luck in the world. People do not pay perfect attention to you. I need to show up regardless of how you pay attention to me if it's important to me. I talk about the 4 practices because there's basically in the encounter form, there's 4 practices that we're working on. And one is you're the initiator. You're the one who is following your process. You are initiating the group bodies process. So you are moving, you're standing, you are sensing, feeling, and starting to name and articulate what your experience is, either inner experience, outer experience, history, memory, anything. Open floor, right? Anything. So that's a process just right there. That's a practice. How do I listen and really initiate from my experience? That's one practice. Another practice is the practice of support. I'm a group person. And at times, once the initiator focuses what they're saying, I, as the facilitator, whoever's facilitating the process, would call for support. Anybody in the group is invited to come and support that person. It could be one person, it could be 15 people, it could be the whole group. We watch the group body. You can support for any number of reasons. Why do we support people? You get to look at that whole practice. I support them because I feel sorry for them. I support them because I like what they're doing. I support them because they're my roommate and they're going to feel bad if I don't support them. I support them because I really know that. And I really invite people to practice supporting for other reasons. Oops, sorry about that. Like supporting someone because you actually are really judging what they're doing. So why don't you try doing it and see what it is about yourself in that role that you might be judging, or judging, or they're doing something that you think, oh, I'm so impressed. I would never do that. Oh my God, I'd never say that. To put your, to learn, put yourself behind them, learn what it would be like to express that anger or vulnerability or sexuality or neediness or some of the things that are really edgy for people. So support, learning about what your criteria is for support. Now, some people support all the time. That's all they do. I do like this, and they jump up for the role. They don't even know what they're supporting. They're so deeply trained that that's my job. I'm being called. So we get to look at all those really deep cellular codependency patterns, so people can look at that.
So already it's sort of becoming therapeutic for both people. It's like there's a person who's moving and tracking, and then the people coming up. There's like it's already group therapy in very quickly.
It is. There's no place where it is not your session. There's no place where it is not your session. So as a witness, you have 3 choices. One is you sit in clear witness. That's another practice. Can I really sit in clear witness? Am I there? Am I open to the process? Is my judging not getting in the way, or my preferences, or what I think should be happening, or my opinions? Am I actually able to be there? Or am I getting into the, cheerleading or judging or what, other parts of me? So clear witness, can I practice that? Or I'm drawn to support, and then I get to practice what that dynamic is. Where and how do I support or not support? So those are 3 roles. The 4th role is one that I love and I think is really important. It's also really risky, is we have an area that's called the window. We have tried a lot of different names of what to call it, but in the end, it was a window, which is I'm a part of the process, but I'm clearly involved with myself. I'm self-involved. I'm with my judgment, I'm with my tiredness, I'm with my I don't like how this is going, or I'm with my, oh, I love this person, I love what they're doing, whatever you're with, but you're not exactly open and clear. You have an agenda of some sort or some issue. So at that point, you are asked as a participant, the practice is to be able to recognize you're not clear witness and go over, literally get yourself up, go over in the window and start to embody, to take shape. And we do a lot of practices around how all these practices we do, we do work on the dance floor basically to get ready for the encounter. So I'm not just throwing people in there, they have practice, so they would know how to take a shape, how to give embodiment, so that the person who's having a process is going, okay, I have some people who are clear witness, I have some people who are really not with me, I have some people supporting me, and I have my experience, which pretty much sums up the world. Right? And they have me. They have me. They do have a facilitator. They really have someone that's going to just like, hey, what are you noticing? What are you noticing? What's true now? And sometimes their attention goes all to the window. All these people, and how classic is that? I'm going to give my attention to the people who are not available to me.
There's 20 people behind you supporting you, and there's a one person in the window, and that's your fixation.
Right. Or there's all these clear witnesses, and you're thinking, I know you're judging me. So often I hear myself say, if they were judging you, they would be over there. So what's it going to take for you to trust that they are actually there for you? What's in your way of actually trusting that someone could really just be there for you? That's such a big issue for so many of us, isn't it? Of like just trusting a real connection, of being accepted and somebody's true presence. So, that those are the practices we work on. And then of course there's the fifth practice, which is the role I'm in, which is tracking all this. And I've been training encounter facilitators, and that's kind of on my bucket list. Is that's the I want to, as soon as the pandemic will allow, to increase that, because I really love this work. I think it's really powerful. I think it's uh, I think it's good therapy. I think it's really powerful, good therapy, and it's fun at times. I mean, sometimes it's not easy, but the dancing that we do before and after encounter is such a good way to reconnect with our resources if we lost them, and to build them up so we can see what happens when we get into a situation where suddenly it's like, oh my God, I've lost my body completely. Oh, where did it go? I was here 2 seconds ago.
Yeah, and it seems, I mean, it just seems, it just makes so much sense to me. I mean, I remember my time at Esalen, and every week we'd be in group therapy, in group Gestalt therapy, which was very embodied, not in that kind of way, but I remember one time someone was in the open seat and they were sort of having their process, and probably half the room was asleep or just like checked out facing the wall. And I kind of stood up and I just said, like, I just want to name this because I felt so uncomfortable. I'm sitting there like giving them all my presents, and um, this sort of facilitator or the therapist just said, like, "Oh, I know, that's okay, that's part of the process." But for me, even as a witness, I was so preoccupied. I didn't even know what the experience of the client was, but I was so preoccupied being like, is this person okay? Like, all these people are not looking. And I guess, like, bringing that into the therapy, I mean, for me, it was becoming hard to tolerate, and I wasn't even in the open seat. And so I guess it's all my projections, but in that sense, it's like it couldn't be included. There was no room for it to be included, even if it didn't matter. But what I guess with you, it's like there's this, it's inclusive from every angle. So you have this web of relationships, it seems, and everyone has therapeutic value. Um, yeah.
And it actually did come from that. The window did come from that for me, because like you, I sat in many, 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 many open seats and many different kinds of group processes. And I always hated at the end where people, the process would be over. Then at the end, we were expected to say, so, I resonated here, or, I really felt this, or, some kind of something. And it was always all nice. And I would sit there thinking, you all are lying. You were dead asleep. You were like, what is this? And I thought, it's not real. It's like my body knows. My body can feel what, if you're there or not, and what you're there with. I might not be able to articulate it, but I am processing it. So I felt like it was so important to have that be articulated and explicit, in work. And I love the outcome. I love what I see when people start to really get, oh, that can be included too. It's not a no to have a judgment. We have judgments. That's what we do. We have opinions. That's what we do. How do I stay connected with myself if you have an opinion about me? You know, how do I do that?
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that strikes me, I mean, I can sort of speak on the behalf of the dominant culture of mental health and how that's treated in Australia, but I guess like psychology is, we have good sort of medical healthcare plans that support us to go and get psychology, but I guess one thing that I really notice and also as a psychotherapist is a lot of top-down processing, kind of accessing at the level of cognition and then somehow trying to find our way down into the body and make change from that point of view, which not to disregard that, but when that's overdone, it's sort of problematic. And I guess what I see in the encounter work and also dance more generally is this bottom up processing as well as a top down. And there's something that you know is really powerful there, and I can kind of feel in the encounter work. And I'm just wondering for listeners who are not familiar with the terms bottom up and top down processing, if you could maybe define those terms, how you see that, and then maybe more specifically how the importance of dance, but or the importance of encounter work or therapy in motion. And yeah.
Yeah, I think there's different people would describe it differently, but top down is where we tell ourselves what to feel or what to do. We have an idea, we get a great belief system or a great practice to try, or like in cognitive behavioral therapy, we change our thinking and see if it helps, and it will. It will to a certain degree, but if it did all the way, we would just read all these great self-help books and we'd be fine. But it's important. We need our narrative to match, to be a part of what we're experiencing. So we need to update our narrative. We absolutely need that, but it won't necessarily change uh, those deep cellular pathways that we have in the body and in the brain. I think even top down, bottom up is speaking to this tenacious body mind split we have in our culture. Because really, the part of the body that we change most in body psychotherapy and in dance is the brain. We might get some muscles, our joints might limber up, but the brain, the pathways through the brain, all through the body, is it's immense. I can't wait for someone to do some more research on that, because I can tell, I know, I can feel it and I see it. I know what's being changed is the nervous system. Yeah, I'm sure we get more breath and oxygen, fluidity. I mean, I see the body change, but what I see most change is the nervous system. So, okay, top down is that the narrative, my thoughts, my beliefs. Mhm. Bottom up is where I start to listen to my cellular memory. I start to listen to the impact my environment is having on me, the nonverbal experience of being a body, which is 98% of our experience, right? We all know if somebody says to you, yeah, I'm fine. What do you listen to? You don't listen to the words, you listen to the tone. The body will always precede, body sensations will always precede the verbal. That's how we develop, right? The verbal doesn't come first. It's how we are perceiving the world in a sensate motor way. And so when we include that kind of processing or listen to it and then start to wonder about the narrative that comes with it, we start the integration. But likewise, we can start from top, but then we really have to allow space for what those early pathways have to say about this new narrative and start to it. And this is another thing that kind of has bugged me, along with this down regulating thing, is it feels like body psychotherapy has become popular. Thank God. A lot of people are doing body psychotherapy. But what they do is they report. I can report to you what I feel, right? But that's different than actually showing you what I feel, actually moving it. Just reporting to you that, yes, I'm having a feeling is not the same thing as allowing my body to have that feeling. And that's what I feel like dance therapy, or the therapy in motion that we're doing in open floor, and open floor in general, and certainly encounter work is doing, is how do I bring that last thing of actually expression, communication, the activity of engaging the body in whatever the process is, not just reporting about it, but doing it, feeling it, doing it, moving it, because that again is what's changing the nervous system, changing the thoughts, changing the body. So
Yeah, and it seems like, that's the work of true phenomenology in some sense, of like living the body as it is and allowing the body to live just for the sake of living. Yeah, rather than, oh yeah, I'm noticing that my body is, I've got a tightness in my chest and I'm feeling crunched over and it's a bit fluttery. I mean, you could go into sensation and sensation and sensation, which of course has therapeutic value, but yeah, there's something about just living the body in movement for its own sake. Um, yeah. I'm also wondering, Andrea, as we're sort of on the topic of encounter work, but maybe more specifically therapy in motion, and I guess these ideas of attachment theory are growing and growing and growing, and I think that theory gives a lot of validity to how we're organized and how we develop. And I know that I guess within the vast integration of what's included in the therapy in motion, um, one of those pieces, along with trauma, along with embodied cognition, and along with all these Gestalt practice, attachment is one. Um, and I guess, like, for a lot of people listening who might be counselors or psychotherapists, working with attachment, is often talked about in many texts in the psychotherapeutic context where you're speaking and you're one on one and you're sitting there in a room. But I guess I'm really curious to know how that emerges in an embodied context. And I guess, like, professionally speaking, how one might notice and work with ideas of attachment in a dance context or just in a more embodied context than we may usually think about that or work with that, or yeah.
well, from my perspective, you're never not working with attachment, because attachment is a part of our how we relate. It's part of our organization in this body. So there's never a moment where you just leave your attachment pattern somewhere else and then you relate to someone. That doesn't ever happen. Whether it's your therapist or fellow movers, it will always be part of the blueprint you are working with. Even if you've done great pains and strains to earn secure attachment, though you're always going to be vulnerable to some of the more extreme continuums of attachment patterns that those original patterns, blueprints that we get in our early development. So they're always there, and in therapy and motion, well, in all the ways. Let me go this way. From open floor work, we work with core movement resources. We have 10 that we've named. There's certainly more, I'm sure, but we figured these 10, we articulated 10 core movement resources that when we really teach our body how to do them, you're going to run right into attachment patterns. You're going to run into, because an attachment pattern is a limitation or an over exaggeration of a certain way of relating and being in your body. Like if I'm anxious, right? This is out, right? I don't know how to settle, I don't know how to be here. And if I'm avoidant, I'm going to be more. They talk about who it was, like that neural cement, whereas the anxious attachment is more like a neural swamp. And so when we're moving, we can feel for ourselves, and as a facilitator, you can see when somebody has those primary attachment patterns that are that are not yet conscious, that are so deep in there that they haven't figured out how to what other choices they might have. Like that is the way. It's always swampy, uh, or always pretty, like. So we can see. So again, that those attachment patterns are always visible and always worked with, and we are with just outside of therapy, we're trying to bring enough resources that people can begin to branch out just on a physical level. And then of course what comes with that is the emotional, the cognitive, the more spiritual dimensions. In therapy, if you're a therapist, and in therapy emotion, we work with therapists who would most therapists know and understand attachment patterns. We start to work with how to name what's going on from bottom up, not just the narrative of your attachment pattern, but the actual physical experience of what that is. And we start to play with it. It's like to exaggerate, to bring it back, to find its little micro movements so that it's not something that you're just falling into. Right, I'm falling into an old pattern. It's something that I'm the artist of. I start to have some creativity and ability, skill, actually, some skill. And again, using some of those movement resources, I start to figure out how to be like one of our core movement resources is towards and away. That's a key. Anytime you do that movement resource, you're going to be smack in the middle of attachment patterns. How do I go towards? Is that safe? Is that something that I can do? Can I go towards with my eyes? Is it hyper vigilant? Do I go towards someone like this? All the ways that I might protect myself and go towards. Or am I really hungry? I just go towards. Great, towards to you. So we're going to see all of that there. And as therapists, we can start to name it, start to disidentify from the narrative that might have created that, and start to expand the narrative so that we have a kind of a larger identity of ourselves based on what we actually have learned to do in our bodies. It's not a new belief system, it's literally a new possibility in how we are embodied and what our capacities are there.
So I guess I'm curious, as a practitioner of therapy in motion, um, we have all these wonderful ways to resource the body to, be able to hold the vast array of human experience through expanding our window of tolerance and being able to upregulate and to tolerate everything and to have more awareness. As a practitioner, do you think there's some way that the dance or embodied practice can sort of change our, say, if we just focus on attachment patterns, or do you see it more as a growing awareness of how we are, and that sort of is a nice place to sit, just knowing that these are my patterns, and then the increased awareness supports us? Or, as I say that, are they kind of two one of the same thing, like two edges of the same coin in some way? But as a practitioner, like, where are you kind of finding your way in what feels important?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And I think, in a sense, what you're talking about is where psychotherapy is also transpersonal psychotherapy, where there is where movement practice, embodiment practice is also spiritual practice, or at least laying the foundation for spiritual practice. Um, so, as a therapist, am I thinking to change somebody? Not necessarily, even if I think that might be a good idea, but more what I'm focusing on is what capacity do they have to tolerate what is? How can I help increase that capacity so that they might have some choice, increase the awareness, increase possibilities, and then starting to look at choice, what choices are being made as we widen the possibility of choice, and then starting to look at belief systems, identities of why we are making one choice than another when we actually have the capacity to be making other choices, but we're not. So then we're looking at, well, how we identify? We're looking at our values. We're looking at we start to shift over into what's really meaningful to me. What do I really want my life to be about? So that you start to listen, into a broader field of your existence on the planet here. Um, I could say more, but we do move into a more expanded dimension that isn't just your psychology, your psychopathology, your patterns. We start to, like, wait a minute, I'm part of a much bigger sphere here, and what do I feel my part? What do I want my part of that to be? What choices do I need to make so that I feel like my life has meaning, has purpose?
Yeah. And so, I mean, a big part of, I guess, my thinking around dance and stuff that I've written and thought about a lot is this idea of how does dance increase our sense of self and agency? And I think that kind of articulates it so beautifully. It's like this is a practice that as you've said in another article, choosing presence over preference or choosing possibility over preference. But, this whole, I guess, like way of thinking about it is how do we increase our sense of agency so that we have choice in the world, so that we can move in creative ways and adapt and change and be with. Um, I think that kind of really answers that question of increasing who we are and our sense of self on many levels of who we are.
Mhm, mhm. I often think of it this way as it's, for myself, just, as my own development, I think of getting out of my own way, getting my childhood out of my own way, getting my belief systems, my identities, my attachment, but getting them out of my own way so that whatever else I am or could be can arise, can come to the fore, can come into this vehicle and help direct what there is for me to do here. Um, as a teacher, as a parent, as a lover, as a person, as a community member. So,
Yeah, that's lovely. And I'm wondering if I guess as an open floor teacher myself who, week after week after week, showing up to dance floors in Melbourne and I guess needing to articulate what goes on in the dance. Like why is this dance important? Like what does it do for the living organism? And we've been talking about this, and it still seems to me something that's very hard to articulate because we're working at such a deep level of the body. I guess I notice that there's something so simple about it. We just enter on a dance floor that's held relatively well. We fling our bodies in movement. We're in a relational field. Like in some ways, it's so simple. Um, Yet it's also so profound and so transformative. And I'm wondering if you would mind me reading a little excerpt out of an article that you wrote called "On Meaning Making in Conscious Dance," and just read it to you. And just as you hear it, I just would love to hear what you have to say about it after hearing me read your words back to you, because I think it articulates from a lived experience the power of the dance and how we can, I guess, like become whole. Um, you say, I recently had a dance where, in spite of the fact there was plenty of room, I felt that it was near impossible for me to take up any space on the floor. I remember feeling small. With open attention, I went towards these small feelings and found myself turning around in tight circles, slowly spiraling closer to the floor. As I allowed this, my body started to tremble. Soon I was entirely on the floor, still turning in circles. I let this small, low circling and trembling to continue, moving with the music, feeling the dance of it. In my mind, I was curious, encouraging this unfolding, asking myself, asking my body, what's needed now? I then became aware of a small place within me that felt like an animal child. This animal child's dance was wary and was one of nesting. I did not recognize this place. I began to feel vulnerable in a very raw way, as if I was without a skin. Curling over more inwards, I found my eyes looking outwards at other movers. As it happened, two dancers were on the floor near me by now. I wanted closeness, yet my movements were protective. In movements uncharacteristic to me, arms crossing and twisting, head bowed, eyes lifted, sensing and orienting through my side body, small steps. I danced what felt like lonely longing in very small ways as the dance went on, and as dancers do, slowly I found this animal child self, tentatively moving towards contact. But I didn't rush or push, allowing the unfamiliar feelings within and following the movements of my body. I was witnessing a part of myself become real in the dance. A piece of my being was allowed room for expression without the interpersonal story that may have arisen had this sequence of feelings happened on the dance floor. In this dance, I met a small but substantial part of my fundamental nature. Yeah, I guess for me, there's some sense of like a reclaiming, there's some sense of like that fundamental nature, like a reclaiming of who we are. It might have been an animal child, all these different things, but it sounded like in some way congruence happened in that moment. There was a way that you just became complete for a moment is what I guess I sense in reading that. Um,
Yeah, it is that sense of, again, getting out of my own way, all of the stories I might make up that would stop that progression, and just being able to follow and follow and follow, and yeah, to re-inhabit parts that might have been put aside or pushed away or never even known. Sometimes there are parts of our humanity that aren't even mine. I think that there's ways that we really feel deeply interconnected feelings that maybe I don't really personally know in my lifetime, but are actually very real experiences just because I'm a human. Uh, I think that that process of unlayering or following and following brings us to the essence of our humanity, and it brings us to a place of compassion for ourselves and for anybody else who feels like that one in contact but can hardly bear to reach out in any way. It's like, oh, I know that. Whereas in the past, like, oh yeah, I'm going to be judging someone like that, but it's, oh no, 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 I know that. And so I think it really, uh, in both ways, it's a way of growing our compassion by meeting ourselves.
Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us up to time, Andrea, and I want to thank you for being on here today. And I also just want to just open up if there's anything else that you feel like you'd rather, or not rather, but that you'd love to say to end this interview. Um, Anything that's stirring from our conversation that's got little light bulbs flicking in some way.
I think I would like to say what a pleasure it is to talk to you, and having known you for some years and feeling your development and your expertise coming out, and just feeling so excited for our field, that so many more people are starting to be really curious and brave enough to say, "Oh, let's brand. There's more to this than our own safety. There needs to be more to this than just staying safe. There needs to be some level of tolerating risk and being curious and kind of going beyond." And I feel really excited about that. I feel excited about all the new schools of body psychotherapy and movement therapy. It feels like it's just like how yoga was maybe 30 years ago, when yoga was just like not really big, was very esoteric. And then, 15 years later, you start to see you can get a yoga mat in the grocery store. And I feel like our field, the sense of embodiment practices, embodied psychotherapy, is really right at that cusp of becoming really mainstream. And that I feel is so important, because I think there's so much healing here and so many ways that we can reconnect to our humanity and to each other. So.